I'm with Miah Arnold, whose forthcoming Sweet Land of Bigamy is coming out from Tyrus Books this summer. Miah, can you tell us a little bit about Sweet Land of Bigamy?
Sweet Land of Bigamy is about a woman who married very young, and her husband goes to work for as a contractor in the Iraq War, and when he's gone, she goes home to mend bridges with her mother, who's an alcoholic, but instead falls in love with a young poet and marries him.
So she's got two husbands?
She has two husbands.
That sounds like hijinks could be afoot.
Yeah, there's some hijinks ensue. But it's also a novel. I mean, the two husbands are not accidental husbands. She has a contractor husband, she has a red state husband, and she has poet, Indian kind of philosopher husband, a blue state husband. And to this extent, the novel is a national allegory, which is, it's the oldest tradition of novel writing. This doesn't hit you over the head when you read the novel, thank goodness, but it's there.
How did you come to write this book?
How did I come to write this book? A lot of these characters have been with me for a very long time, and I had a short story called The Original Carmen, which is about this girl's mother, and all three, Carmen and Terrible, who's the main character of my book is Helen. Carmen is Helen's mother, and her boyfriend, Carmen's boyfriend, is Terrible. And so I had a short story with all of them in it, and I just really loved the story. And I thought, and in that story, Helen has an affair, and I thought, well, I want to make this a novel, but what am I going to do? And I just kept on thinking and thinking, and one day I just thought, I decided to turn up the heat on the affair and make her actually marry somebody else. And it just felt like it was always the thing that was supposed to happen to her. It wasn't, it just felt exactly perfect when I decided that.
How did the book evolve as the writing process went on?
It was told in a lot of different voices. So first of all, it was told it was going to be chapters that were maybe 30 pages each, and each chapter would be in one person's voice. And then it was going to be and I didn't like that then, because I didn't like I didn't like the way that switched. You would get too into somebody's point of view. So then I put it all in Helen's point of view. But Helen's kind of having a bad time in a lot of this novel, and I thought it was horribly depressing. And people would read it and they'd say, "That's such a downer," and I didn't want a downer. And so I wrote it again. And as I was rewriting some parts of Helen's voice, I realized that it was a whole bunch of different voices. And that really goes with one of the motifs of the book, which is that, a person is built not just by the people who they keep in their lives on purpose, but even by the people that you brush into on the way. People that you see for 5 minutes are going to change the course of your life. And so that, but it was a very slow and gradual process as I built those changes. It's really a novel that was built around voices, and each voice took its own life, and those lives made for kind of a crazy plot to follow.
So you said that you were trying to not make it depressing. Would you say it's an uplifting book? Would you say it's a real book? Like how would you classify it at this point?
I think it's just like it's a funny book, I think, and it's a serious book. I don't know if it's exactly uplifting, but I think it's it's hopeful. It's an Obama era book. So there's a story that I have to tell about my grandmother, which is that I gave her my MFA thesis after I spent a few years writing my MFA in a program. And when I first started writing, I had this real idea that I was going to tell the stories of the people in this town that I grew up in. And I grew up in a town on the Ute Indian reservation of 500 people, and and there was a lot of there were a lot of tragedy. There was a lot of difficult times around there. And I went to a really fancy liberal arts college, which I loved, called Carleton, and I noticed when I was there that a lot of the students were really into social justice, and they were really into changing the world. But then when they talked about the people whose lives they wanted to change, they would talk about people like the people in my family, they would sound like pawns in a game of theory or something like that, and it would infuriate me. But then I realized, you know, it's not their fault they didn't grow up where I grew up. It's not their fault they didn't know the stories, and I was someone who could tell some stories like that. So I started telling these stories, and they were very, I don't know, they were kind of like naturalism. They were these very dark, sad stories about like this is the underbelly of like America. These are the really sad stories, and people really liked my stories when I wrote them for that crowd for the most part. But I brought my MFA thesis back to my grandmother, which I was very proud about, and she read 2 or 3 stories, and she said, "This is terrible." And my grandmother at that point, she was the mayor of the town. She had emphysema. She couldn't walk anymore because, you know, she had smoked all her life. And all she did was read all day long. And all I wanted was for her to love them. But she said, "I thought you were going to write me some stories that would make me be able to go to bed at night. You know, I've seen all this. I've seen all this pain, and I've seen all this tragedy. I wanted you to write me something hopeful so that I could sleep." And I left, and I said, you know, I went back to my friends at school, and I said, "My parochial grandmother said this crazy thing about my book." And then I kept on thinking, and I thought, wait a minute, my grandmother's who I want to write for. And my grandmother started the first housing authority in eastern Utah, and my grandmother spent every day of her life fighting for, you know, people in this area of the country that she loved and people that she loved. And I do want to write a book that she can read and go to sleep at night. That doesn't seem like such a bad goal. I didn't want to give up on any of the kind of social realism that I was writing. I didn't want to give up on writing about things that were hard and that were difficult. But I also wanted it to be a book that would be, you know, that had hope. Because, you know, I had this real belief that books that are only gritty are just as unrealistic as books that are only, you know, happy. And it's very hard to put them all together. But that's what I started doing when I started writing my book out, and all of the stories after my MFA thesis. I really worked on kind of marrying the grit with the happy and the hokey, and I think that that's a more, you know, accurate representation of how life is.